Thank you for being here, especially if it's late for you and if you've been sitting here for a while. I appreciate that. And yes, that's what I will be talking about. And I want to also say, as a like to preface this, I will not talk so much about this is how to implement sociocracy, because first of all, I don't think there is such a thing as this is the way. And the other one, I will talk about all the problems, not all the problems, but a lot of the problems instead. And what my goal is to kind of give an overview of just like, okay, this is an overview of the known issues, just kind of offer that so that we all have a shared map and then can decide what best paths are to walk from here. That's kind of my approach here. So that's that, critical moments in implementing sociocracy. And so here's my overview on the different steps, not because I say this is the roadmap and this is how it's done, but because this is how it typically kind of works. And that way I can break it down and tell a few stories about it on each of the ends. So typically what happens is that there is some sort of an initiator or a group of initiators in an organization that says we should do something different about our governance. So they are somehow able to start a conversation. And then typically there's some sort of a design phase. I will talk about each of these phases a little bit more. So just do a brief overview here. So the design of the new governance system. And then ideally, the system somehow gets accepted formally. And then we roll it out, do all the things that we said we would do. Now let's look a little bit more deeply at all of those. So as I said, initiators are kind of one word of calling the people who are surfacing the governance topic, because one major issue that I think we all run into, no matter how you do it, is that typically people don't know that there are options around governance, right? And that is one of the reasons SOFA exists, Sociocracy for All, because we wanted to put sociocracy on the map, but not, sociocracy for all doesn't mean everybody should do sociocracy. It means everybody should have the opportunity to do it, right? Not because it's the one and only way, but because if people don't know about it at all, then there is no choice, right? Because Robert's rule is what it is, or having a CEO that decides everything is what it is if we don't know about alternatives. Anyway, but so somebody in the organization needs to bring up governance and say, wait, governance is a thing that we might have choice about. Let's review, is how we're running the way we want to run. And typically this is really messy because they somehow need to generate that conversation, and that's not trivial. So I always I am in admiration of the people who managed to do that successfully. Now there are a bunch of challenges. Hold on one second. And that is the most common one that we see is if that initiator is too enthusiastic, then there is a typical dynamic that happens that everybody else gets super suspicious. So, and that is just so common because the people who are the most likely to be that initiator person, right? The people who are interested or have some kind of affinity to governance, they encounter new governance systems and they are just on fire. I'm guessing that if I asked you to raise your hand, who in here is or has been and has played that role of initiated an organization, it's probably almost everybody here, because those are the kind of people who come to conferences, right? Who else spends the day or two at some sort of self-governance conference? It's such a nerdy thing to do. Anyway, so, but it is that enthusiasm that then sparks suspicion, and that can be already a non-starter. So our advice for those people is, has somebody, hold on, I'm quoting somebody that I just talked to this week. He said he was successful because he really played it cool. And I think he said something to the effect of, he didn't say, oh, look at this is so great. He said, this is just something I found. You might want to look at it. I don't know. It sounds kind of cool, but really like super non-enthusiastic. And he was very enthusiastic, but he totally held back on it. And that was wise. All right. So now the next problem. Sometimes I wonder why there's even sociocratic organizations. I see like it's all basically like one issue after the other. So let's look at all of them. How do they decide about a new governance system if they can't shop around to try out all the different options? I can't tell you how many clients have told me that. Well, what other systems are there and how would they work? And I think like, really, you want to study? Like, that's going to take you a bunch of years to study them to the extent that you will then be able to make an informed decision. Like, seriously, that's just not possible. So while I love the curiosity, and of course they should be able to make an informed decision, but how informed, right? And how many systems given, it would all be easier. I'm sure many of you have heard me say that a zillion times. If we all learned about proper governance methods by 11th grade in school, we could say, oh yeah, sure, grab a brochure, flip through the options, refresh your mind, then make a choice. But that is not the case. That's not the world we live in. So that means we're heavily compromising. And I really feel for clients who tell me that, because I'm like, yeah, that's, I wish you could be in a position that you could fully choose in an informed way. And I don't know how to help you with that, because I don't think we have the resources and the time to do that. So on a positive note, what I also see is that many people kind of want that choice and want all the options and want to look at 8 different governance methods and understand them all. And then typically what happens is they kind of just fall in love with one of them. And then all the why this one and not the other one's questions kind of fade in the background. But of course, that might happen for one person. Now, if you have a whole organization, there will always be at least one person who's like, we haven't explored enough alternatives to make a choice. And that there's nothing you can say in response to that, because they're right. But what is exploring enough? What does that mean? So, unanswerable question. And then, of course, the other catch-22 around that is, in order to make a choice, they need to get training. But if you're talking to an organization instead of just an individual, then the organization will ask, why would we send 20 people in training and pay for that if we don't know if that's what we're choosing? But how would they choose without having been trained? Boom, chicken egg problem. There's no good way out. Another somewhat related but independent problem is who decides about governance. Because especially in messy situations, it's easy if you have a board or you have a CEO, you have whatever, somebody owns the thing. Great, that's easy-ish, I won't say. I'll talk more about that. But typically with people that end up talking to me, somehow maybe we attract them. That's not so clear. I mean, and you might know that inspired me to actually write about that very problem in Who Decides Who Decides, of just like being so burned out on people who don't even know who decides their governance and therefore can't change it, that I was like, okay, there must be a better way of setting that up, but it would have to be from the get-go, which we'll get to at the end. I might be wrong about this, but I think as the outside consultant, I always feel a little sad in that role. It's like, okay, I can only watch from afar while you guys initiators figure out how to get your organization to be interested enough to make one move about getting trained or about getting coaching, about something. But there's not really much I can do, especially, of course, if I rally to, if I'm too vocal about it, then it just sounds like a sales pitch. So I'm kind of in the same boat as the initiator. I also have to just come back if you're ready. Because if I'm too pushy, that's just going to drive people away. So I'm aware that I'm also in this, I'm kind of also caught in the same power dynamic that everybody else is caught in. One approach that we use, I just wanted to also add some good news here is, of course we think about that, and our approach is, instead of leaning we're kind of mixed on it, but one way would be to go heavy down the consultant route. The other approach is to train the initiators so they are fully informed. So, there's implementation that has helped, but I've never talked to anybody besides a few people. Like nobody even knew I existed. I was just kind of from afar helping the initiators do what they needed to do, but it really came from the inside. So that I think is the most promising model, because you don't run into these into these power struggles. But then again, there's not a lot of money in that model. That's one problem. And it also not acknowledging is also another dynamic. Anyway, another thing that we do in SOFA is, if you have one person who's initiator in some sort of sector, let's say you have somebody who's in a school, that at least I can send them to another person that's in the same situation also in the school, so they have somebody to buddy up with somehow. So that's something that we can do with our approach. Different if we were just a consulting group, there wouldn't be that much we could do actually. Anyway, now success means in this stage that you have buy-in, enough buy-in to review your governance and even form some sort of governance review, implementation, whatever circle, something that looks at, okay, what do we do with governance? And let's say there is enough buy-in that the whole thing continues, it doesn't just fade away, and then we go to the next step. Now this governance circle designs the governance system. That's kind of the core work, but also almost the most predictable, because that I know how to do. It's all the, getting to that point, and the stuff after that, that's the tricky part. But this is fairly straightforward. On the implementation circle, ideally, there's somebody who's close to or the decider, if you have a story on that one, actually. What is that now? Yeah, no, actually, that will come later, never mind. Sorry, let me just orient myself real quick on my slides. Yeah, we'll continue, and I'll tell you the horror stories in a moment. So initiators, of course, you want to capture that original passion and the original, also because they tend to be the people who know most about governance, right? So you want to have them, and then what other stakeholders you need. What they need to do is they need to define the circle structure, aims and domains circle structure. They need to write some sort of governance agreement, that kind of the constitution kind of document that this is how our governance system works. They need to make sure people are trained enough. They need to do all of that while getting feedback from everybody else. So that's a monumental task, of course, but again, it's fairly predictable and not as messy as some of the other steps. If you have a small enough group, that's fairly easy. If it's a large group, let's say, if it's more than whatever, 30 people, then it's, then that smaller team, the implementation circle, needs to use the good strategies of kind of working with all the different layers, because you can't call everybody into the same room, say, let's define names and domains, and then you're done. It's more complicated than that if it's more than one group that needs to have a conversation. Challenges in this phase. If it's too ambitious, too many circles form too fast, is the typical one. Sometimes people are like, let's say you have the dynamic that the founder or the CEO kind of person is like, oh yeah, self-governance, self-management, that all sounds great. Empowered people, that sounds great. And then it starts to kind of, then they start to realize what it all means. And then there's identity crises and pushback and all the messy stuff that gets stirred up, which I'll talk about at the end. Typically people are like, oh, the training issue here. Oh, do we have to get trained? Can't we just do this without getting trained? And then they try to wiggle their way out of it. And then they only understand it half, and then they make a mess of it. This is not working, but they haven't actually sat down to try and understand it. Just all of these things. But again, hard, but not complex. Yeah, and then, sadly, it's also not uncommon that organizations as a whole get thrown into an identity crisis. Like, they notice as they look at the governance that they don't actually know what their aim is and their mission is, and then they start arguing about it, and then they fall apart. Or they realize that actually, because of all the things they're looking at, their legal stuff is not sound, or their funding base is not sound. And, it's kind of a volatile moment looking at governance. So, it's just like with people, if you start looking more deeply at everything, you might uncover that there's actually other things you need to look at. So that's disheartening, but also not too surprising. Success would mean that we have a proposal around the governance structure and all of that, and it has a lot of support. So they've already done the work of asking for feedback, like all of that. This is kind of an innocent looking stage here, but that there's a lot of incremental change and adjustment here to get to that point. It's not a straight line. Right, and then we go to acceptance phase. Somebody will have to approve this. And that can be a little messy, as I said. So it might be, for example, that the board approves it, but everybody else needs to like it too. Like I worked with a food co-op, the board approved it, but we made sure that everybody was able to say yes. Hold on, I see kids coming here, and I hope they're not going to come into my house because this is not a good moment. Okay. Then another group was, I remember one group that implemented, and they simply had the people, like it was basically a self-appointed group that accepted the new governance system, and that created a little bit of outrage. It's like, wait, who are you to decide that? You can't make a circle and then approve the governance system. Okay. Do you hear the background noise? Yes. This is not the best moment. Sorry. Okay. Then now we're rolling out the things, right? We're forming the circles, populating the circles. If we don't already have them, it might be that there's the old team structure just gets transferred over. We form a general circle, we connect it. There's a little bit of heavy lifting of putting that general circle in place, right? And also the question of who does that, like, does it happen bottom up, or is a whole larger group involved, and so on. So this is all fine tuning, but again, by that time, you've already basically won the race. My experience is that it's better to do this relatively swiftly because you don't want to just drag along, but it's also hard because so many things have to happen at once, right? This is that moment where you're basically thrown into the water and now you're expected to swim, but can you swim? Like, you've talked about it, but once you're in the water, it might feel different. So are people ready actually? And so that, if somebody's thrown into the water and they realize they can't swim, you have to kind of respond quickly. You can't just say, okay, let's try that for half a year. They need to do things, right? So there's also, all of this typically happens while operations are running, right? All right, but success happens if this whole thing is accepted, and I kind of mixed it a little bit here in my speaking with also just implementing, forming all the things and so on. This is basically then the long-term process of taking it, tweaking it, adapting, all the information flow questions, basically all the questions that aren't all the running organizations that just never go away. Training people, making sure people are informed. Okay. Success here is long-term success and adaptation. It's very common that as soon as you implement, you have to change the circle structure because you realize it actually has to be a little different. So, but that I count as success because if you're able to do it, that's great. If you're not able to do it, that's the problem. So change, if it's not totally wild, change I interpret as a healthy sign. Now I want to talk about one dilemma, or the dilemma actually. Just for the record, I don't have a great answer, I think. Should we implement top-down or bottom-up? What I mean by that is bottom-up implementation is that people form circles and then hope somehow, you know, this circle, let's say, adopts sociocracy and then gets another circle on board, and then they somehow hope the whole thing will just trickle into the whole organization, you know, go viral kind of a thought, whatever, something like that. There's some dynamics here that I just want to list because they're common. So this is very fragile, right? It's very, very risky. Like I know of an organization that worked on a new governance system for, I think, 2.5 years or so, with a lot of community engagement. A lot of people were very enthusiastic. And then it was the moment, you know, the board knew about it all, they say. Then the board said, no, that was that. It's a long and dramatic story, but that's the short version. So the bottom-up approach didn't catch, you know, it just didn't catch on. Yeah, so that was very disheartening, and the organization is still suffering from that. It's years later now. Second example, just recently, actually, I heard about that. It's one of my favorite implementations in an organization that was starting out as a department. Like this is a whole unit of a larger, very hierarchical organization. They've been doing amazing things. And just 2 weeks ago or so, I learned that the person that was implementing and that was basically holding, kind of shielding the unit from all the hierarchical stuff, he got fired. Not for any particular reason besides these people here wanting to hold the power. There was nothing wrong with what he did, you know, it was his success that was probably the problem. So, you know, so bottom-up approach is really, really fragile. That's what I mean. It's those stories of people just dismissing it, wiping out years and years of wonderful progress. And it also doesn't, yeah, there's legitimacy questions of like, now what do, like, who gets to decide these things? It can get really, really messy. For example, I know of an organization that has changed into a flat organizational structure, and they basically have kind of the CEO and then a lot of equal level circles, because they wanted to do it bottom up, but they're kind of not moving forward with their bottom up. So I'm just hearing the story, getting nervous about, like, you need to build your structure, otherwise how are you gonna act, you know? Anyway, and it doesn't spread as fast and as well as one would think. I don't know why, but that's what I see. Like I remember it's kind of just a little moment, but it was somewhat of a moment that stuck with me, of just somebody telling me, like, he was an excellent facilitator, still is, I assume. And he said, you know, it's weird. Like, people tell me they love my facilitation, but they don't want to learn it themselves. Like, why? So, you know, it's not so much that people are like, oh, this is fantastic, let's all do it. They're like, this is fantastic, will you facilitate our meetings too? Which is a big difference, right? Because one scales and one doesn't. It's frustrating. Then again, on a positive note, there's one other example that I like, where I was training people in a very hierarchical situation. They didn't stand a chance to transform the system. That was clear. So I was almost feeling a little hesitant about even helping them, honestly, because I was like, okay, where are you going to go with this? Like, you're just like, I don't want to make you just more desperate and unhappy. Like, there's not much room for choice here. This was a university. But then again, they were able to, there's basically nothing they could decide, but they had really good process around the recommendations they were able to make. So they had to act together all of a sudden, and that did make a difference, although it didn't change the power structure at all. All right, second to last, actually not quite second to last, never mind. I'll continue. Okay, top-down implementations. This kind of the other extreme, right? So the top level decides they want to share power. Sounds great, but what are the typical dynamics that we see? I wrote here suspicion and rebellion. it's funny. There's just never stops to entertain me. Actually, just what kind of stuff gets stirred up. It's wild. Like I know an organization that somehow the thing that got to them was that somebody had decided what kind of agenda format would be used. And somehow that was the last straw. And then they went, a certain number of people were in full rebellion mode because they perceived that as you're telling us what to do. So it was rebellion, and rebellion is one flavor of unhealthy power relationships. So that somehow happened. Then there's, of course, the suspicion piece. I'm big in that camp myself. I remember I talked to a CEO in a company in Europe, and I remember I asked him, so what are you looking forward to in implementing? Because he's like, I'm in love with sociocracy. It's like, great. What do you want to learn in this? Like, what do you want to encounter? And he said, learn? No, just what do you mean learn? Like, I just want my people to, work more efficiently. It's like, I don't think we're going to be happy with each other here, because so I went into suspicion. Actually, I was very suspicious, and I think I had good reasons to be suspicious. Like, this person is not going to change their ways. Nothing is going to really shift here if he's entering with this mindset of other people have to change. And deferring to old leadership, also a very common pattern. What's my story on this one? Yeah, honestly, I've grown a little. What can I say about this? I guess I find it just so disheartening of just how, I can't tell you how many times I've walked into organizations that swear that they have their power relationships all worked out, and that the founder really wants to to share power, and really there is no issue. There's no founder issue. There's no this or that. It's like, okay, you cannot be the first ones, but I think I want to believe you. And just recently, I got disappointed again. I was like, wow, I really believed them this time. I really, really did, And then the founder pulled a thing where I was like, what? How? How can you think that that is okay to do? So, and they all deferred to the leader too. It's like, okay, so I don't even know whether we've moved away from square one, if these things can still happen. All right. So that's a holding on to power and a deferring example at the same time. Here's one last story. Worked in an implementation that was very far along and then basically fizzled out because the company was owned by two brothers. One of the brothers was all for it, and the other brother kind of pulled the emergency brake and was like, no, actually, sounds too risky. And it was the ownership piece that got to him. He was actually willing to share the management piece, the decision making to a large extent, but he wasn't willing to touch ownership. And that then created the whole thing of like, wait, you want us to have a say, but you don't want us to, own a share. That doesn't seem to line up. And then everybody got very suspicious of the people in power, blah, blah, blah. And that's where it deteriorated. So my question is that's really my current question, because I think I'm just a little frustrated by it all. I just wonder if there is even a clean transition from a power over power under system to a power with system. Is it even possible? Because as I said, so many times I've believed it might be, this time it will be possible. And then you just walk right into the same old stuff again and again. So, and the way I look at it, oops, that was the wrong direction. Yeah, is, and you might remember that, those of you who know it, I wrote about kind of the same metaphor. I keep coming back to that one, and who decides who decides. How do you get onto a seesaw? How do you get onto it? Because the problem is it kind of starts with one side up and one side down. So if somebody's already on the seesaw, they will be in power, right? And then you can get on. But I don't know if that only happened to me and my siblings, but my older brother, he would sit on it, and I was too short to get on, and I would get incredibly frustrated with it, because I was completely at his mercy, basically, because of course, again, everybody with older siblings knows exactly what I'm talking about, because the moment I tried to climb on there, he'd jump off, and I'd fall off, and it's not only painful, it's also so humiliating, I want to say. But this is metaphorically what happens in organizations, right? They say they share power, but all of a sudden they don't. And boom, there you fall back again. Now you're the person who's at the bottom again. You feel like, oh, you know, it kind of messes with the metaphor, but there you are again at the mercy of somebody else. What's the other one? Sorry, I went into the wrong direction again. It goes this way. Now, and we also all know what this looks like, right? If you're like, okay, we're going to get onto this by walking, right? But what happens as soon as you're on the other side, all of a sudden you're the person in power. So the power, you still don't have power balance just because you walked up. The power difference is still there. So how slowly can you walk for doing that? But before I talk about that, actually here, this is the other model, right? That's mom holding the thing, right? And then you get on, and then you're on it. Like you get on it at the exact same time while somebody's holding it in place, so nobody can let it snap and so on. I mean, that's sometimes what a consultant can do. But then, of course, there's always the problem of like, well, who brought the consultant in? Who's paying for the consultant? Basically, the question is, whose mom is it? So will there ever be a neutral person, you know, that can kind of provide the space so people can work out their power stuff and then embrace it together? That's a tricky one. And I guess the only possible way in which it can work is this, right? Where it is where the people on both sides are in relationship and in conversation with each other. So the only cleanish situations, never fully clean, but cleanish situations that I've seen are the situations where there's a lot of vulnerability. And that's, I think, my next slide here. Where people are going slow, it's somewhat incremental. There's a lot of training. Everybody knows a lot. The thing I was going to is a lot of vulnerability, both on the side of the people in power and the people trying to step up. Because only if they meet each other with compassion and empathy can they step out of the power thing and kind of meet each other as humans, which is an equal power relationship, or at least more equal. So it, yeah, basically, as I know somebody said, like a client, like anyway, it was a client organization where people who had been in a power differential, the former boss says, you know, if we constantly have to think outside of the box with this power, like our power system, maybe the box is the problem. And that kind of opened the conversation for everybody to honestly talk about the power relationships. So that was a great inviting statement. And they were able to then hold it together for, like, hold the responsibility for their power relationship together. That's what they managed to do. But that requires a lot of conversation. Then diluting power by not having the CEO implement, but having an implementation circle implement, big difference, right? Because you're diluting that centralized power and you're already spreading it a little, and then they are the people to hold the seesaw. So you kind of build a two-level system. Explicit agreements, term limits. For example, what I do actually these days, what I like to do is to just work with whoever's in leadership and say, great, let's just keep you in leadership, but we're giving you a role description and a term limit. Because now you are at the mercy of your circle, and we're not changing much, but we're changing who put you in place, basically. And that changes the dynamic a little bit. And again, a term limit, because that makes it clear that this is not going to be forever, but they are now part of the system. They're not outside of it. Kind of tie them into it. And then also anchoring it in the legal system, right? That's why the work that Jerry is doing around all the legal stuff is so important, because if it's not backed up by both the legal system, the kind of the formal power and the money, then it's just window dressing anyway. Or what is that? Lipstick on a pig. So those are the things yeah, I guess just to summarize my point, that might be my last slide. I honestly have not seen a clean transition of power. Well, maybe once, actually, maybe, yeah, but then again, there's always a little bit of a footnote. So I do know one example where it's like, yeah, that seemed clean, but it also wasn't without challenges and bumps in the road, and it's not solved. There's always a little bit of noise still, even in that organization. But I think all of these contribute to taking the edge off and to also address some of the trauma that is in the system of people having been in powerless situations too often, too long. Like that seesaw with my brother and me. Like, how many times can he let me fall off until I'm like, you know what? I don't trust you anymore, because so many people have been burned so many times, right, that they wouldn't trust anything, no matter how good it is. So then the problem is not sociocracy. The problem is how traumatized people are, with very good reasons. So that is the field we're working in. So sometimes we're thinking that sociocracy is the problem, but really the problem is all the millennia before. And I think on that note, on that very optimistic note, I will end. And we do have a little bit of time for questions. I see something.
Yeah, we have. Thank you so much, Seth. We begin now with the Q&A. We have some questions in the chat. First question from CE. There's some saying of once you take on funding, you might be CEO, but you learn really quick who has the power. All of the discussions about self-management assume business can make payroll. If any individual takes out a loan on their house to get through some lean months, even if people pitch in by lowering wage, what in that individual has more power since they took on the risk?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about?
Well, yeah, and that's what is nice in this example is it shows the two things. One is, how the legal and the financial system ties us into these power relationships, because the ways we work is not fully compatible with the system out there, right? Because the system out there wants one person to be like, one person signs, that person is going to be responsible. So it just doesn't align. So we always have to work around that, right? Like a client of mine that we're just discussing, like, who's going to sign the legal document now, and they decided to just basically just have one person do it and just kind of take a deep breath, all of them, because first they were thinking of all signing it, but that somehow doesn't, anyway, it's all that's hard. And the other one that I want to point out in Christina's story is that, or in her point, is that it's that there's these two sides, right? It's easy to say, we want power, share your power with us. But what's on the other side of power? It's responsibility. It's not, so often we have this story in our head that the people in power, all they want is power, but if you're listening to the other side, they're actually saying, it's a little bit like a child that always wants to have a say, always wants to have a say. And as soon as they're 18, they're like, can I just be a child again, please? So power and responsibility going together means that just so much needs to be talked about, and so much needs to be understood about each other's realities. Because if I'm the one who signed, that's gonna keep me up at night. So what do we do? What do we all do with that, right? So there's just so much. Okay, I'm talking too long about, given that there's more things. Okay.
Then the next one is from Day Waterbury. The seesaw metaphor fundamentally embeds power, balance versus imbalance as a frame. What if we accept that first, and there are many different dimensions of power, and second, there will functionally never be anything like balance? And then we address the challenge of how to manage the constant flux of contextual influence.
Oh yeah, yes, I agree. Yes, yes, it's true that it's an oversimplified story. Thank you, Dave. You're right. I think you're right. I think what I would like to replace it with, but that is not as tangible. It's more like a balanced enough approach. What is balanced enough? And then all the different dimensions kind of create a system that is either balanced enough or not. You know, like let's say, for example, let's say formally I'm in power and they isn't. Okay. But we have a really good and trusted relationship. I'd say, okay, that's, you know, like that dimension kind of takes the edge off that. It doesn't make it go away, but it creates a package that's a little bit more palatable, kind of. So that's just one simple example, again, to just bring the point across that there's many layers, and that I've been just kind of focusing on who has a say, but of course there's more things with it. These will functionally never be anything like balanced. Well, and again, balanced enough, I think. I think there is such a thing as balanced enough, because I think if we're in our comfort zone and we notice it as a symptom, if things are balanced enough, then people are kind of content, you know, to be content and to be focused on work instead of being focused on the drama because of power stuff. Not everything has to be perfect, but if you're content, if it's good enough and you're content, that's you will see in people's behavior that they're relaxeder about it and more willing to just go with it. So that would be my answer. And by the way, I just want to acknowledge, I see the number of messages going up. We do have until, I mean, formally the session goes till now, but there is this 15-minute gap that we have till the closing session. So I'm okay just continuing, but of course you're free to do your own thing. How do you deal with projection between org members when transitioning? Projection, like, you mean projecting power or like things that, like power stories onto somebody? Yeah, I know. That's where I'm going with, like, maybe sometimes this is kind of a nasty way of saying it, but sometimes I wonder if people are maybe too traumatized to even pull something off like that, you know, because of what you're saying. I think it's just a lot of conversation, because those projections only go away if through empathy, basically, because you see the humanity of the other person. Like, you know, for example, if I'm the person who signed, right, it's easy to vilify me as the person in power who gets to sign stuff. But once you really have a conversation about what that's like, you see more of the context and more of the other things. And there's always that, for example, hold on, let me just read it properly. Like, people who have to take the lead, how they deal with projection of circles being dominating, exercising too much power. Yeah. And that's just people's suspicion speaking, right? And their rebellion and just how burnt they are by these things. And often what happens is that the circles that kind of take a lead, right, they do that not because they want to, I mean, sometimes, but typically they don't do it to be in power. They do it because they want a certain thing, like they want more, you know, they want the organization to be more effective and like all of that. But all of that will only come out if they have a conversation to really hear about where the others are coming from. So those superficial stories around, you just want to have the power, just you hear more data that just messes with that story enough that you give it up. But when that breaking point is, that you give up that story, that both sides give up that story, right? That might take a while. Since transitions are so hard, what about for community, or just saying, forget it, let's start from scratch with sociocracy? I agree with you. I think that would be better. And of course, you would still carry all of the baggage into the situation. But I think having a clean slate is way easier, yes, but that's not, I mean, now what? What do we do with that insight? How much time may a transition need? Forever. How long does it need? It really depends on the size. This is too hard to answer. Thank you, Day. I saw the comment. How do you retain employees if there's roles that have term limits? Yeah, I know that's the problem, right? Again, one of those cases where our organizational system that's choice-based and consent-based rubs like is incompatible with the world out there, because a system like sociocracy assumes that there's choice, but is there choice if somebody needs the livelihood? So true choice, in a way, I mean, that I'm not the first person to notice that, right? I mean, many people who are favoring sociocracy also favor systems like universal basic income, because it's kind of like, in order to create this level of choice, you need to have the economic system at the wider scale so that you have choice. So yeah, but that's not something we can change so easily. So that's just something that will be limiting. I wonder if understanding the values in the organization and starting with a values-based transformation first might improve the odds. Can you explain that?
Sure. Hi. Yeah, so I'm a certified VERIC transition and so one of the things that we do is we measure values in an organization. So the personal values, the current organizational values, and the desired organizational values, in order to try to improve well-being and retention and engagement and all those things. And so where we aspire to end up is in a more aligned understanding around who we are as a group of people, what's motivating us, what's driving our decision making. And so if there's that context, I wonder if it might bolster some of the pieces of the implementation. It's just a thought. It's fascinating that it's so tricky. But every group is so unique that maybe there might be an explanation that's worthwhile to see if it increases the odds, especially if maybe the context is set up as before we embark on this journey together, let's really get to know each other on the deepest level, and see where our values are already in conflict. Because if we can get to a place where we've aligned around or consented around a set of values by which to move forward through the implementation, maybe I would posit that would have a better outcome. I can't, it's a hypothesis.
Yeah, I think it increases the odds for sure, because anything that will be unifying and trust building will increase the odds. Yes. One thing that I'm worried about, but that might be just a matter of how, not in principle. The one thing I'm worried about is running into the discussion of how aligned do we have to be?
Right.
How deep do we have to explore whether we are really deeply aligned, How deeply aligned to be to work together? I mean, that's the other question. I find that a really interesting one, because I never quite know. And of course, it's more fun when you're aligned, but that also means you now have the whole kind of you're more, what is it called? Like more of a monoculture, yeah. So now that's I don't know. I think that one, the jury is still out for me. But yeah, what is, and again, it goes to that enough, what is aligned enough? So what is
exactly
enough, explored enough, all of that. Okay, I will go to happy to think about legal financial containers, not right this moment, but yes, all of that is needed. You kind of need to, it's kind of starting in the middle. That's how I look at it. We're starting in the middle with organizations. What we notice when we change organizations is we also need to, look at people's mindsets. That's going more on the individual level. And then we notice we also need to change society in which these organizations are so that it really works. So it goes in both directions. And that's unfortunately what it is. We just have to change everything. Okay. As the height of the Faulkner approaches zero, we have fewer trouble. Oh, I think my brain is too fried to grasp that right now. If it's important to you and you think it's worth it, please do unpack it for me. But other than that, Day, do you want to speak to that?
It feeds into the comments made about UBI, both above in the discussion above and in my further comment below. Essentially, by equalizing things. We're saying, yeah, look, there could be some asymmetries, but if you fundamentally and structure into your relations that those asymmetries can never move beyond. You know, let's say that you were covering baseline needs uniformly, and there were little luxuries or something that you could get asymmetrical in, then you've kind of reduced the height of the fulcrum in that regard. So I was saying, hey, you know, I picked on the seesaw metaphor, but I was saying, let's keep it and look at it. What if you imagine that, like, you look at asymmetry in our current society and you look at where like the top 100th of 1% is or whatever, we essentially have a seesaw where the fulcrum is as tall such that we basically have a vertical line. We've got people dying on the street and we've got people consuming the resources of thousands of people. So there's like, that's not a seesaw really. It's like this huge stick in the air. Right. Anyway, I'm just ripping on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I see that. Yeah. We're really we're not in a good environment or context to do any of this, given if we look at our economic situation, we as a society. Have you found ways to entice these leaders who have power with the lure of becoming a child again in their sense of alleviating responsibility and finding a more comfortable balance? Well, the problem is, it's of course not really that they can give up responsibility. It's not really being a child. And as I think he is saying, it remains an adult relationship where you will have a part in it. So it is from stepping out of, oh, instead of me being responsible all the time and having to sign stuff, I want you to be responsible. But that's not the choices, because those are both choices that are toxic choices, because it's going to be, stuck on somebody. What we need to do is go to a system where we can be co-responsible, but that means even the former whatever responsible person will still be responsible. They will just not be responsible alone anymore. And that is something that is enticing to leaders because they do feel lonely. So saying like, hey, you're carrying all this load alone by yourself. Don't you think it would be more healthy for you to carry it with others? And if you, like, many would say, oh my, yes, if people were really willing to carry the responsibility with me, that would be fantastic. Okay, I think we might be, okay, let's look at one, but there's comments. That's also a comment. Maybe we're done. Phew.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sept, for this so interesting perspective and also experience. I think that's the most value when one is serving not only perspective is only serving, but is related. What is the relation also with the experience that you have in consultancy and with other organizations? So thank you so much, and also for the audience. I remember that Sociocracy For All is a voluntary organization. You have the link if you would like to donate. And also let's see in 3 minutes the closing session. So thank you so much. And if you want to in the chat to say something about appreciation or comments, so we can go. Anything more to say?
Well, what I just said in the chat, the discussion that we just had is basically the discussion. The reason it's on my mind is because I'm writing about it right now. So that would be the new book. We're all about this seesaw business and power business. So looking forward to learning more about that.
Thank you.
Bye.